everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of videos in which I'm going to be sharing tips. And these tips are going to be primarily relating to language teaching, but I'll also include ideas that relate to good teaching practice in general. So the first tip today, and the one that I'm going to discuss in this short video, is very, very dear to me, as it is what actually inspired me to create what is now known as the Accelerative Integrated Methodology, or AIM, which is a methodology that rapidly accelerates language acquisition. So this is the tip, summarized in a quote by Alfie Kohn. Consider what counts in a classroom is not what the teacher teaches, but what the learner learns. In order to explain why I love this quote and why I feel it is great as my first choice as a tip for you to consider in your teaching, I would like to now just explain a little bit about my background, which is also probably a good way to begin. I started my career as an immersion teacher in an inner city school in Ontario over 35 years ago. And in some ways, it really seems like just yesterday. I was not at all a good teacher at first. I really struggled through my first few years. I just couldn't get a handle on what was the best way to teach, and classroom management was really a challenge for me. However, the French language was a passion for me, and I wanted so very much for my students to learn to love it as much as I did. And of course, to successfully acquire the language. That was really key for me. I feel that if we can give our students the gift of language, in my mind, we're among the most important teachers in a school. So after a couple of years, I started to improve my skills as a teacher, and luckily, some of my primary immersion students became confident and developed a basic beginning language proficiency. Then, after 5 years as an immersion teacher, I switched to a different school. I got a job closer to home at a school that had a basic or core French program, as we call it in Canada or in Ontario. And this is how I learned French. So I was excited to work in the context in which I'd acquired French myself so well. However, to my surprise, the students in this school from the first through the 7th year of instruction were no different in their language skills. Imagine that after 7 years of 30 minutes of French every day, there was not one student who was able to speak with me. There was not one student who could read with fluency, nor with correct pronunciation. And I was so really upset when I found that not any of the students in the class could understand when I spoke in French. They couldn't write a sentence, much less a paragraph, and I remember being so frustrated. I really didn't know whether I should even stay in language teaching. I really felt that I was failing my students. Since then, I've spoken to many teachers about the notion of teaching versus learning. And I remember a few stories of teachers who described colleagues who received their students and then who came back to them asking why the students don't know this or don't know that, and the language teacher explains, but I taught these things. So, back to the quote, what matters is not what we teach, but what students learn. And therefore, within the first year as a core French teacher, realizing that my students had really not learned any French over the course of 7 years, I really felt that I had to do something. So I decided to begin some action research with my students and just did whatever I felt worked, and as I discovered, what I found worked. And bit by bit, step by step, over the course of 10 years, I tried and tested different things, and eventually I built a system and methodology that we now call AIM. So the tip for this week is very close to my heart, and I do hope that you might consider it in all that you do as a teacher. It became part of my day-to-day experience with my students, and it still does as I now work with both students and teachers. I'm constantly asking myself, am I making sure that my students are learning what I teach? Am I doing everything possible to support my students and ensure that they're able to use the target language only in all interactions in the classroom, both with their peers and with me? Are they able to use the words I teach them? Am I recycling words that are key to language proficiency? And do I place these words in different contexts so that they're acquired? Because this is key to language acquisition. Are the students able to use the words that I teach to also be creative? For example, am I making sure they can write stories of, say, 8 to 10 pages in length? I can say that it is absolutely possible to create an immersion environment in all language classrooms and to have students do all these things. I've experienced it with my students in the many, and also in the many classrooms that I've visited. So in future videos, I'll be providing tips that will help you to achieve this success, to make sure that students acquire the language that you work so very hard to teach them. The ideas that I'm going to share will be taken from questions that teachers often ask about in workshops, tips that are more concrete and practical and specific to certain name strategies, as well as others. So I really hope that you'll join me again next week. And if you're interested in making comments on this week's tip or on asking questions that we can include in future tips for success videos, please click the link below. Thanks everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.